Okay, good morning, everybody. We are holding today Daf Chav Tes Amud Aleph towards the bottom of the page. Ein Oisin Oisei Kapandaria. It's about 12 lines up from the bottom of the page. And I just want to mention that today's learning has been sponsored in memory of the Jewish people who were massacred in the village of Lamaz during the Holocaust. I do want to just share with you a link so you can read more about it. When I was told to make this announcement, I went to look up what this massacre was. It was a terrible, terrible massacre, and close to 2,000 Jews were taken out and shot and buried. I've put a link in the room, although the article is in Polish, but there's on top you'd have an option to have it translated into English. A terrible, terrible thing that happened. May all the neshamas have an aliyah, and may such atrocities never ever happen again. Okay, now we're going to start. 1 second. Just want to mute everybody. Just figure out how to do that. No. 1 second. So, 1 second. Participants. And here you go, mute all. Okay, so says the Gemara, in Ois, in Kapandaria, you cannot use the shul as a Kapandaria. So the Gemara wants to know, my Kapandaria, what is a Kapandaria? So says the Gemara, Rava says, Kapandaria Kishma. A Kapandaria is what the name implies. My Kishma, what does the name imply? It says, Kamanda Amma, it's like someone who says, Adamakifna Adore, instead of going around these row of houses, let me just take this shortcut and go in over here. So it's a conflation, right, of a few words together. So that's what a kapandaria is. A kapandaria is a shortcut. Instead of going around these houses, I'm going to go this way. Amar Rabavo says, when you say that you cannot use a shul as a shortcut to go from one place to another, if there was a pathway before the shul was built, then it's permissible. In other words, it's only if the shul was built with the purpose of being a synagogue, and you want to use the synagogue as a shortcut, that's not permissible. But if the path was there from before the shul was built, and people are used to using this as a path, then they can use it as a path now. They can use it as a shortcut now. Another qualification about this is Rav Nachman bar Yitzchok says, "Hanichnas almanas shaloi lasses kabandaria." Somebody walked into the synagogue without the intent to use it as a shortcut. He went into for some other reason. He had no intention of going out the other side. His intention was to leave the way he came in. But then he changed his mind and said, instead of going out the way I came in, I'm going to go out the other way, which is going to be closer to where I need to get to. Musas Lassis Kapandaria. Then you can use it as a shortcut because your intention wasn't to go in and to use it as a shortcut. It's only when you're leaving, you want to leave from the other door, and that's okay. Well, Amar Reb Chelbai says in the name of Rav Huna, somebody goes inside the synagogue to pray, he can use it as a shortcut when he leaves, right? In other words, you've davened, instead of leaving the way you came in, you can leave from the other side if that's more convenient for you. Like it says, when the people of the land come before Hashem, on the festivals, those who enter by the way of the north gate, to prostrate themselves before Hashem, they shall leave by the way of the south gate. In other words, Hashem has pleasure that the Jewish people would come in and go through the entire width of the Beis Hamikdash. You don't have to enter and exit from the same gate. You can go out on the other side. On the contrary, it's better to go out on the other side, through the other side. This way, you cross through the whole thing. Okay,
Rabbi.
Yes.
Wasn't that true of the Kohanim? They would go in through one side and they have to go out the other side.
Okay.
During their particular time period that they served. So So my question is, isn't this about the Kohanim? Are we sure that it's about
It's so
all?
it seems if this is from the book of Yecheskel, and in the book of Yecheskel, it's really talking about the third Beis Hamikdash that's going to be built, right? And so it seems that at that time it's going to be for everybody, not just for the Kohanim, but it's going to be for everybody. That Hashem will have pleasure from people going across from coming in from the north and going out from the south. So it's talking about the Beis Hamikdash in the future. Okay. So says the Mishnah further. We mentioned that Alu Bayasovim, if grass was growing, Leitlish, you should not pluck out, you should not uproot these grass because you want to cause grief by the people, so that they should want to rebuild this ruin. We're talking about a basic Knesset which has become abandoned, and so therefore it's no longer in use. And if you see grass growing, you shouldn't uproot it. Rather, you should let it stay there, so that when people come in and they see that there's grass growing, they should feel grief and daven to Hashem that this should be restored to its former use of a synagogue. So now the Gemara challenges this, because there seems to be a conflicting brisa, where the brisa seems to give a condition. Well, Tanya, isn't it taught in the brisa that ain't a toilish or machel, that one cannot uproot the grass, meaning of an abandoned synagogue, and feed it to animals? Avol, the brisa continues, however, toilish or meniach, he may uproot it and just leave it there. In that, if that's the case, then the brisa explicitly allows for you to uproot it and leave it there. Just you cannot feed it to your animals. So here, our Mishnah seems to be saying that you're not allowed to uproot it at all. So how do you explain the seeming conflict? So the Gemara answers the conflict by saying, Ki tanan nami masnisin toilish or Michael tanan. When our Mishnah taught this rule, it was trying to teach the same thing, although it didn't say it explicitly, but it's teaching us also that that when we're saying you're not allowed to uproot it, it's talking about uprooting it to feed to your animals. Although the Mishnah doesn't say so explicitly, the Gemara is clarifying for us that it doesn't conflict with the Brisa, who tells us that one is allowed to uproot it and leave it where it is. It's only that you're not allowed to uproot it and feed it to your animals, because our Mishnah is talking about the same thing, that you're not allowed to uproot it and feed it to your animals, because that's going to defeat the purpose of allowing people to have grief from the fact that grass is growing over there. Okay. Tana Rabbanon, there are a number of things that not only are you not allowed to do in an abandoned synagogue, but you have to treat also a cemetery with respect. So Tana Rabbanon, the rabbis taught in a brisa, Beis HaKavara is in a cemetery. You're not allowed to conduct yourself with levity. Ein Marin ben Behema, for example, you're not allowed to graze an animal over there in a cemetery. Nor should a water canal be passed through them. In other words, the human beings can create a canal, but you shouldn't create this water canal to pass through a cemetery. Nor may one pick grass in them. And this is the reason why we bring it next to what we've just discussed, because this idea of picking grass, we mentioned with regards to a shul. So we have in the cemetery also this idea of not picking grass. And if you did the grass, if you don't pluck up the grass, then what do you do? 1 second. What do you do? You burn them in their place, out of respect for the dead. Yes.
It says mipnei agmat nefesh. What agmat nefesh?
No, agmas nefesh.
By pulling that.
Agmas nefesh was for the last case with regards to the here.
Before you go too far, I wanna ask that question.
Yeah, no problem. So you're asking what agmas nefesh do you have in the case of the abandoned synagogue, where if a person sees grass growing there, they're going to have agmas nefesh. What that means is, if I walk in to a synagogue and instead of seeing a beautiful shul, I see that there's grass growing inside the shul, which means that this is being completely abandoned, and no one's making sure to keep the place clean, right? And no one's pulling out the weeds, etc., I start to feel very pained that what was once a beautiful synagogue, which was a respectful place to come and honor Hashem, has now become something that's abandoned and not kept up, and that's going to cause me grief. So therefore, I say, leave the grass. Leave the grass, so it should cause you pain, so that you should pray to Hashem that this synagogue should be restored.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
No problem. So, but here, what we've just mentioned in this brisa is, with regards to a cemetery, that you have to be very careful in a cemetery not to act in a very common way with levity. And so therefore, we don't allow you to take animals there to graze. We don't allow you to have a water canal to pass through it. And also, we don't pluck the grass. And if you do pluck it, then you need to burn it in its place. And we say this is out of respect for the dead. So now the Gemara straight away asks about this last phrase, Mipnei kavod hames. What is this referring to? Are you telling me that because of the kavod hames, you have to burn the grass? That's what the Gemara is asking. To what does the out of respect of the dead, what does it refer to? If you're going to say that refers to the conclusion of the brisa, which says that if you pick grass, you got to burn it out of respect for the dead. If once a person burns the grass in its place, my covenant mesimika, what kind of respect for the dead is there in this action in burning the grass? I mean, how does that constitute respect for the dead? So rather, what we have to say, it's not referring to the last phrase of the brisa, which talks about burning the grass, but rather it's talking Ela Aresha. The end of the brisa is going back to the beginning of the brisa to tell us that you have to behave in a respectful manner in a cemetery in order to show respect to the dead. So that's what it means. Mipnei kavod hames, for out of respect for the dead, because of respect of the dead. That's why we don't do all these things enumerated here in the brisa. And that's the end of the Gemara. Now we're moving on to a completely different topic, but related to something that we discussed earlier, and that is with regards to the different parshiyos that we read around the time of Purim. Okay, where we change the Kriyas HaTorah, the reading of the Torah, from what we regularly read to something that is related to the time in which we are. So the Mishnah starts out as follows. This is right at the bottom of Chavtes Amud Aleph. Says the Mishnah, Chodesh Adar shechol yes b'Shabbos. If Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos itself, Kairin Parshas Shkolim, then instead of reading the regular reading of the Torah, we read Parshas Shkolim. There'll be a discussion in the Gemara as to what is Parshas Shkolim. There's a machlokes as to what we read for Parshas Shkolim. But it seems from the Mishnah at least that on Rosh Chodesh Adar, if Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, instead of reading the Parsha of the week, read Parshas Shkolim. Chol liyos b'seicha Shabbos. If Rosh Chodesh fell within the week, then makdim l'sha'ava, then we advance Shkolim reading to the previous Shabbos, meaning the Shabbos preceding Rosh Chodesh. That would be Shabbos Mevorchim. So Shabbos Mevorchim Adar, that's when we read Parshas Shkolim, unless Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos, in which case we would read it on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar. What happens afterwards? The Shabbos after Shkolim, Mafsikin the Shabbos Acheres, we take a break between that Shabbos and the next Shabbos before we read the next of the four Parshiyos, because what we want is we're going to want the next Parsha, which is going to be Parshas Zachar, to be next to Purim. So therefore, if we would read it right after Parshas Shkolim, it wouldn't be right before Purim. So therefore, we take a break between Parshas Shkolim, the first one, which is either read Shabbos Mevorchim, Shabbos Mevorchim Adar, or on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, and then the Mishnah continues, Bashnia, on the second Shabbos, right, after the break, then we read Zachar, we read the portion of Zachar, Bashlishis, and then in the third week, we read Para Aduma, we read the portion that talks about Para Aduma, Berviz, and on the fourth, we read HaChedesh Azelachem, which talks about the Korban Pesach. B'chamnishis, on the 5th week, after you've read all these parshias, then Chesed Lechesidron, then you go back to the regular order, the regular reading. You go back to reading the normal parsha. Now, obviously, we know that that's not our practice today. However, the Mishnah is stating an opinion, right, that what you would do is instead of reading the regular portion, you would substitute it with these different readings because of the time of the year. Says the Mishnah, Lakel mafsikin. For all the festivals, we interrupt the reading of the regular Shabbos, meaning if any Yom Tov falls out on a Shabbos, or if any Yom Tov falls out on a day that we would read the Torah during the week, instead of reading the regular reading, what we do is we read this the other reading that is related to the date. So, for example, Rosh Chodoshim, when it falls out on Rosh Chodesh, then we read the reading for Rosh Chodesh. For Chanukah, on Chanukah we read the special reading for Chanukah. Or Purim, and on Purim the reading for Purim. But Tanias, when it falls out on fast days, we read the reading for the fast days. Ubamamodos, and on the Mamodos that they would read there, that would be in the time of the Beis Hamikdash. The people who belonged to the group that it was their turn in that week, so they would assemble in a shul and they would pray that the Karbonos should be accepted, and on each day of the week they would read the Torah from the story of creation. So for those people, instead of reading the regular Torah reading on Monday and Thursday, for example, they would read wherever they're up to in terms of the reading for their group, that it would be their turn to pray on behalf of the Yidden that all the Karbonos should be accepted. And likewise, one second, last word. And on Yom Kippur, also, instead of reading, let's say, the Shabbos reading or the weekday reading, we would substitute it with the reading for Yom Kippur. Yes?
I want to know what's the difference Beshabbat, Betoch Shabbat.
Beshabbat means that it falls on Shabbat itself. Betoch Shabbat means in the middle of the week.
Oh, Betoch Shabbat is in the middle of the week. Okay, I didn't get that.
No problem.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay. So there we have the Mishnah. Everybody understand the Mishnah? Yeah? Okay, so that these are the different readings that we have, and we substitute the regular reading for these special readings when the time comes. So now the Gemara is going to mention a Mishnah that implies that the first of Adar is a good time for the collection of the Machzis HaShekel. So the question is why? So Tanan Hosta, we've learned in the Mishnah, this is a Mishnah in Shkolim. It says over there in the Mishnah of Shkolim, Be'echad Ba'adar, on the first day of Adar, Mashmiin ala Shkolim. The Beis Din makes an announcement about the tax of the Shkolim. They go to collect these Shkolim. Why do they collect Shkolim? Because we're going to use those Shkolim in order to be able to purchase the different karbanos that are communal karbanos. But ala kilayim, it's also the time of year, right, where on the first day of Adar, where the Beis Din makes an announcement about the prohibition of kilayim. What is kilayim? Kilayim is when you plant together different species of vegetables, seeds, or fruit, in where when you plant these things together, that's considered to be a mixture, and that mixture is not allowed. And likewise, if you mix a vineyard with other things, these are all kilayim, and they're not allowed. So now, the Gemara asks as follows. It's understandable why, at this time of the year, on the first of Adar, that the Beis Din would remind everybody about the prohibition of planting kilayim. Why? This is Manzriyahu, because it's a time of sowing. Now, Tosfos points out, the first Tosfos on the page, that it doesn't mean that the time of the first of the Adar is the beginning of the planting season. It means that it's the end of the planting season, and this is where things begin to sprout, and now is the time when the Beis Din say, you need to look out into your field to see whether any mixtures are growing so that you could quickly uproot them and not allow them to continue growing, right? Sometimes it can happen inadvertently. Sometimes you can mix seeds up or whatever, however it occurs, right? One has to make sure that when they notice that there's different species growing together, to uproot it as soon as possible. So that's why they would call out on the first of Adar. That makes sense. Elal Ashkolim, but with regards to announcing on the Shkolim, Minolan, from where do we know that Adar is the time for the Bezdin to go out and proclaim about the Machzis HaShekel that everybody has to give? So, and for the Gemara says, Amar Rav Tavi, Amar Rav Yeshia, Rav Tavi says in the name of Rav Yeshia, the Amar Kara, because the pasuk says, Zois Eilas Chodesh B'Chodshai. This is the Eila offering of the new moon at its renewal. Now, Amar Torah, the Torah thereby says, Chadesh v'havei korban b'truma chadasha. Renew a month by bringing the offering from a new separation. What is it? What does this mean? It means like this. When you bring up karbanos, you want to bring up karbanos from contributions that were made for that year. Now, when does the new year begin? So, biblically, the new year starts on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. That is the beginning of the months of the year, right? It says Rishon Hu L'Chodshei Hashana is the first of all the months of the years, and so we know that the beginning of the new year starts Rosh Chodesh Nisan. So already from Rosh Chodesh Nisan, you want to renew the sacrifices from new money that has been collected, right, for this upcoming year. So that's why the Gemara concludes its response saying, "V'kiven the Nisan boyi akruve mitruma chadasha." Since in Nisan we're going to need to bring the karbanos from the new collection that you've taxed everybody from the new shkolim that you got. So kadminan v'karinan be'echad ba'adar. So we advance the portion of shkolim which discusses this tax, and they read it on the first of Adar. Why? So that you let people know that they got to bring their shekalim to the Beis Hamikdash before the first of Nisan. So we do this a month in advance. Now, we do this a month in advance. 30 days before, this is when we start reading about it. Now, who is of the opinion that you're supposed to do things 30 days in advance? In other words, when there's a Yom Tov coming up, you're supposed to prepare 30 days in advance. So there's a machlekes whether when a Yom Tov is coming, you need 30 days to prepare, or whether you need only 2 weeks to prepare, right? So the Gemara suggests, come on, according to whom do we say that you need to give a 30-day period, which would therefore mean that you're supposed to read the portion of Shekalim about giving this tax to the Beis Hamikdash? Who would be of the opinion that you're supposed to do it 30 days before? The like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. This would not be in accordance of the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. To hear Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, because if we would go according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, Ha'amar Shtei Shabbos, since he says that 2 weeks are sufficient, so therefore this wouldn't accord with him. The Tanya, as it was taught in the Brisa, Sheilin. We inquire about the laws of Pesach before Pesach, 30 days. That's the opinion of the Chachamim. But Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says that no, 2 weeks of study is enough. You don't need to have a whole month to prepare. So therefore, we must say that the time that you would go and read about the Shkolim should be only 2 weeks before Rosh Chodesh Nisan. To which the Gemara answers, no. Our Mishnah, which says that we read Parsha Shkolim at the beginning of Adar, the Shabbos before Adar, Rosh Chodesh Adar, also can accord with the Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Why? Kivin the Amar Mar. Since the master has said that what? On the 15th day of Adar, the money changers would already sit in the province in order to be able to change people's money into half a shekel, right? So therefore, 15 days into the month, people are already sitting there. The Brisa tells us that what? that on the 25th day they would sit in the Beis Hamikdash, right, somewhere on the Temple Mount. They would sit there to basically tell people that you better hurry up, you better start giving, because soon the people are going to come around and they're going to coerce you to give the tax, right? So therefore, since we've said in this brisa that when do the money changers start sitting out? On the 15th. So therefore, because of the money changers, right? So therefore, we read 2 weeks before they go out, which would be on Rosh Chodesh Adar. In other words, since Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says you only need 2 weeks preparation, you don't need a month's preparation. Since the money changers are already starting to sit out on the 15th of the month, so 2 weeks before would be Rosh Chodesh Adar. So therefore, our Mishnah could even go according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel, because bringing the Machzah Shekel on Rosh Chodesh Adar, that's too late. Right? So that's why the money changers come earlier, right? And they sit out on the 15th, 2 weeks before that would be Rosh Chodesh. So our Mishnah can go according to Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Okay. Now we've said that either Rosh Chodesh Adar, if it falls out on Shabbos, then we read the Parshas Shkolim on Rosh Chodesh Adar, or the Shabbos before, if Rosh Chodesh falls out during the week, we read Parshas Shkolim. So now the Gemara wants to know, my Parshas Shkolim, what constitutes the portion of Shkolim that you say we're supposed to read? Rav said, you want to know what Parsha Shkolim is? It's the Torah reading that we read for Rosh Chodesh, right? Which is commanding the Jewish people and tell them to bring me my offering, my food. In other words, about the karbanos that we're supposed to bring up every day. That's what you're supposed to read from Parshas Pinchas on Shabbos Shkolim. That's according to Rav. Shmuel says Kisisa, that Parshas Shkolim is where we read about Kisisa, where Moshe is told that when you want to lift up the Jewish people and everybody wants to give an atonement for their soul, then they should give a Machzah Shekel. So there, where it talks about Machzah Shekel, that's what we read on Parshas Shkolim. So what we have over here is a machlekes dispute between Rav and Shmuel as to what Parshas Shkolim is. So now we're going to examine both of these views. So says the Gemara, this is all well, according to the one who says that Kisisa, that Parshas Shkolim means that we read from the portion of Kisisa, which talks about the Machzah Shekel. That's why we call it the portion of Shkolim, the Chsiv Shkolim, because it talks about the Shekel, right? Machzah Shekel. According to Rav, who says that what we read as Karbani Lachmi, which talks about the Karbanos. So why would we call it Parshas Shkolim? Or according to the, we leave out the word Hacha, Midi Shkolim Ksivi Hasam. Is Shkolim mentioned anywhere in the portion of Karbanos? Why would we call it Parshas Shkolim? You understand the question? Yeah? In other words, when we say Parshas Shkolim is the Parsha of Kisisa, so it makes sense to call it Parshas Shkolim, because in that portion, in those verses, it talks about the shekel, right? However, if you're going to say that what we read in Parshas Shkolim is the portion from Parshas Pinchas, which talks about the karbanos, right, of the morning and the korban tamid, where does it mention shekel over there? So why are we calling it Parshas Shkolim? So the Gemara answers, it's still appropriate. Yes, it's still appropriate to call the portion that Parshas Shkolim. Why? What's the reason? The reason is Rav Tavi, it's in accordance with the statement of Rav Tavi, which links the mitzvah of giving half a shekel to the obligation of bringing the sacrifices. In other words, what's the whole point of collecting the Machzah Shekel? We say the whole point of collecting the Machzah Shekel is to be able to have these contributions, this money, available to buy the karbanos for the daily offerings. So therefore, the connection between Parshas Shkolim and the portion about the daily sacrifices is that we're calling it Parshas Shkolim to say that the whole intent of the Shkolim is for the portion, is for the karbanos that are brought every day. So therefore, it's not a problem to call it Parshas Shkolim, even though we're reading the parsha of the karbanos.
Rabbi?
Yes.
So the korbanot we can bring the animal or we can bring money to buy an animal, isn't it?
Right. So when
So
we
you can still call it shkalim.
right, but what we're saying is as follows: the reason why they would make a collection at the beginning of the year, right, in time of Adar, is to be able to have fresh money to be able to buy karbanos for the new biblical year starting in Nisan. Okay, which means everybody would have to make a contribution, right? And then the people appointed in purchasing the sheep that were offered up every day, they would go and then purchase it, right? So nobody would be bringing the sheep themselves to offer it up. The Beis Hamikdash would, the people in charge of the Beis Hamikdash would buy it, but we would give the money, right? Okay. So now the Gemara examines these two views in light of another consideration. In other words, when you have the discussion between Rav and Shmuel, Rav saying that we read the portion of Parshas Pinchas, right, which talks about the Korban Tamid, right, and Shmuel and Shmuel, right, Shmuel says, is it Shmuel? Yeah, and Shmuel says read Parshas Kisisa. So there's another consideration to bear in mind when we consider these two views. Now we're saying that it would all work well in accordance with Rav, who says that we read the portion of Pinchas. Why? Because it talks about the obligation to bring the public offerings, like it says over there. Because Rav Tavi, and as Rav Tavi stated, that the half shkolim is linked to the obligation to bring these sacrifices. But according to the one who says that we read kisisa karbonis miksivi, does it mention karbonis? So the Gemara answers shkolim ladanim ksivi. It's talking about the shkolim that were used to buy these sockets. What they would have is they would have the beams, and the beams would go into these sockets on the floor, and the money that was contributed through the machzas shekel was used to purchase these adonim. So therefore, what is the connection that you're trying to make between the shkolim that you read about in Parshas Kisisa and the shkalim that everybody is supposed to offer for the karbanos? Okay, I'm not sure if everybody understood what we just said. I'll say it again. We're saying that on the first of Adar, on Rosh Chodesh Adar, when it falls out on Shabbos, we read Parshas Shkalim, or the Shabbos Mevorchim, the Shabbos before, we read Parshas Shkalim. Why? To remind everybody that they should bring up the money in order to be able to purchase the karbanis for Rosh Chodesh Nisan, right? That's what we're saying. So now, what is the portion in the Torah that we read that reminds us of this? So according to Rav, it's the Parsha about the karbanis. So that would be a very good reminder to tell me that I need to bring up my money so that they could buy more karbanos. So that's fine. But when you're telling me, according to Shmuel, that what we read is Parshas Kisisa, when you read Parshas Kisisa, that machzas shekel that Moshe Rabbeinu collected, right, that was used in order to be able to purchase, to pay for the sockets, the adonim, right? And these were the silver bases that were used in the Mishkan to hold up the beams of the Mishkan. So how does that serve as a reminder that I need to give you money for karbanos, when really in Parshas Kisisa what you're reading about is money that was given as a contribution for the adonim, not for the karbanos? That's the question of the Gemara. Okay. So the Gemara answers to defend Shmuel, says the Gemara, Kedetani Rav Yosef. Actually, the pasuk, that passage that we read from Parshas Kisisa, actually does refer to the shkalim that was used to buy the karbanos, as it was taught in the Brisa by Rav Yosef. Shalosh trumas ein. In fact, when you read in when we read about the contributions that were made, there were actually three separations that were made, right? In other words, the word truma, which means the separation, to separate, right, appears 3 times in the portion of kisisa. Okay, and the 3 times the word truma appears comes to tell us that there are 3 contributions that were for 3 different purposes. Shal mizbeach la mizbeach, one contribution of the altar was that was used for the mizbeach, meaning for the karbanos. V'shel adonim la adonim, the contribution that was made for the base were used for the base. V'shel bedek habayis lebedek habayis, and the contribution for the maintenance of the temple was used for that. So we have 3 different trumas, and those 3 different terumas, one of them went for the karbanos, and so therefore reading kisisa is not a problem because it still reminds me about bringing up new money to pay for the karbanos. Okay, so now let's consider another consideration. We'll go backwards and forwards. One time we're challenging Rav, now we just challenged Shmuel and we defended him. Now we're going to go back to challenging Rav. There's another consideration. It's understandable according to the one who maintains that you say the parsha of Kisisa as Pashkalim. Hainu the Shani Hai Rosh Chodesh Misha Rosh Chodesh. That is how the Torah reading on the Shabbos Rosh Chodesh of Adar differs from the Shabbos Rosh Chodesh of every other month. In other words, what did we say in our Mishnah? We said that when these dates fall out on a Shabbos or on the weekday, what we do is we change the Torah reading and we read something else in its place. Now, if you're going to tell me that on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, we read Parsha Shkolim, right? And you're going to tell me that Parsha Shkolim is Parsha's Kisisa, so then what that means is instead of reading about the Karbonos, Parshas Pinchas, that we usually read on Rosh Chodesh, we read instead Parshas Kisisa, the Parshas Shkolim. As Karbani, according to you, Rav, who says that what? That on Parshas Shkolim you read from Parshas Pinchas, my shani. What difference is there going to be? How do you going to recognize that this week is Parshas Shkolim and you're going to read something different than every other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh where you would be reading from Parshas Pinchas? You understand the question? In other words, there's no difference, right? And our Mishnah said that when all these things occur, like for example, when you have Rosh Chodesh Adar fall out on Shabbos, instead of reading the regular reading, right, which would be what? Which would be the reading of Rosh Chodesh, instead you read Parshas Shkolim. But if Parshas Shkolim is the same reading as Rosh Chodesh, then what kind of a change is there? So the Gemara answers, actually, there's still,
Question.
Yes.
You're using the word shani over here to mean different, and yet the spelling is the same as another word that means teaching. So are you using the fact that this is the way it was taught by the Rebbeim to their students as a way of explaining it? Because, when you say it's different here, there's normally an aleph in the word shiny. If you understand what I'm saying.
I do understand what you're saying. However, from the flow of the Gemara, it makes sense that we're saying difference, as you'll see from the continuation, that's really the only way to understand it, because the Gemara answers, as you'll see in a moment, right? The Gemara answers that it does differ, and it tells us exactly what the difference is. So that's the only way it could make sense. Otherwise, if you're going to translate it in a way of like teaching, then the answer of the Gemara doesn't make any sense. There's no question and answer. The question and answer only makes sense if you translate it as how does it differ.
Okay.
So let's read the Gemara inside. See, the Gemara answers that, trying to defend the Rav, Says Shani, there is still a difference. Why? The Il Rosh Chodashim, because when you have Rosh Chodesh, Kari Shita Binyan Diyema, on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, 6 people are called to read from the current portion of the Torah. V'chad b'Rosh Chodesh, and one person is called up to read the portion of Rosh Chodesh. V'ilo ha'idna, whereas now on Rosh Chodesh Ada, Kulu b'Rosh Chodesh, the regular Shabbos reading is going to be read, is going to be superseded by the portion of Shkalim, right? And all those called up to the Torah read the portion of Rosh Chodesh, as we're going to explain.
But that's not what we normally do.
That's correct. That's not what we usually do. And we're going to see over here that this exact discussion that you just mentioned. The Gemara says like this. Let's say the Parshiyas. This explanation of Rav works well according to the one who says that after the four portions have been read, like we said in our Mishnah, we return to the regular order of the Torah. Let's say the according to the one who says that we return only to the order of the Haftarah, but we do read the current weekly portion on the Shabbos of the 4 portions. So then my Shani, then how does it differ? In other words, when you have a situation where, like we do today, whenever you have Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, for example, right? So you read the regular Parsha, and it's only at the end, right? You read about Rosh Chodesh. If you have Parsha Shkalim, Parsha Zachar, right? We still read the regular Parsha, right? Whatever Parsha it is that we're reading, and then at the end of the Parsha, right? The last person gets called up for the Haftarah, and he reads from the portion of Parsha Zachar or Parsha Shkalim. So that's fine, right? So if that's the way we do things, it doesn't work well with what we just answered for Rav. In other words, let me go back. Let's read this again. Okay, I'm sorry. Let's just go read this again. Shani, there is a difference. The Ilurush Chodesh, Kari Shita Binyan Diyema, for another Shabbos Rosh Chodashim, 6 people are called up to read the current Parsha of the Torah, right?
Parsha of the week.
V'chad b'Rosh Chodesh, and one person is called up for the portion of Rosh Chodesh, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? One second. Yeah. The ilu ha'idna, but now when Rosh Chodesh other falls on Shabbos, kulu b'Rosh Chodesh, then what would happen is the regular Shabbos reading would be superseded by the portion of Shkalim, and all those called to the Torah read the portion of Rosh Chodesh, and so I 1 second, I'm stuck. 1 second. Say the Parsha. 1 second. 1 second. I'm not sure. I'm a bit confused, but let's just keep moving, and hopefully I'll come back to this. Okay. So now, according to Rav, then there would be a difference, because we wouldn't be reading it like we would regularly do on Rosh Chodesh. Rosh Chodesh Adar is going to be different, because we're going to read both the portion of Shkalim and the portion of Rosh Chodesh. I think I understand now. Okay, sorry. Okay, so when we have a regular Rosh Chodesh, right? What we do is we start from the beginning of Chamishi, which talks about the carbon Talmud. Then it goes on to say Uvayim Shabbos, and then it goes on to say Uv Rosh Chodashim. But when it falls out on Shabbos, right? Instead of starting from as Karbani Lachmi, we start from later on in the portion. We don't read about the carbon Talmud. We read later on about Uvayim Shabbos of Rosh Chodashim. I think that's what he's trying to say. So therefore, there would be a difference, because what you would do is you would read the Karban Tamid, right? You read from the beginning of Chamishi for Rosh Chodesh, right? For Parshas Shkalim, right? Because again, what did Rav say? Rav said that Parshas Shkalim means you read from the book of Bamidbar, from Parshas Pinchas, right? So Parshas Shkalim would be the first portion, right? And then the last portion would be about Rosh Chodesh, right? So that's all fine. That would all work if you say that Rosh Chodesh and all the other days supersede the Shabbos and you don't read the regular Parsha. But what do you say about the person who says that that the Parshias never change, the Parshias stay the same for a time like Rosh Chodesh, right? It would stay the same, and it's only that the Haftorah is different, that the Haftorah, the last part you would read for Rosh Chodesh, if that's the case. So when it comes to Parshas Shkalim, and you're going to read the portion of the Karbanos of Rosh Chodesh, how would that be any different than a regular Shabbos? And for the Gemara, shiny, it's like it would be different. The Elul Rosh Chodashim Karushita Binyana Diyema, because on a regular Rosh Chodashim that fell out on Shabbos, 6 people are called to read from the current Parsha. V'chadi Kare B'Rosh Chodesh, and one person reads the portion of Rosh Chodesh, the Ilu Ha'itna. Whereas now, when you have Rosh Chodesh Adar falling out on Shabbos, Karu Telasa Binyana Diyema, only 3 people are going to read from the Parsha. V'arba and 4 people are going to read the portion of Rosh Chodesh, which would mean that I think what this means is that just like you get 4 people called up on a regular Rosh Chodesh, and they split between them the portion from the beginning of Chamishi, from Vayidaba Hashem Moshe Matzavas Bnei Yisrael until the end of the portion of Rosh Chodesh. So the first 3 people to be called up on Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar would read the Parsha of the week between the 3 of them, and then the last 4 people to be called up, they would split up the reading of Rosh Chodesh. Why would they do it this way? The reason they would do it this way is because of Parshas Shkalim, to have the extra portion of the carbon Talmud being read at that time, because it's both Rosh Chodesh and Parshas Shkalim. So that's how we would have a difference between every other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh and the Shabbos Rosh Chodesh of Adar. Okay. Does everybody understand what I just said? If you have a question, you can ask now. You have to unmute yourself if you're going to ask.
So the second way, you would read 4 from the Parsha.
3.
And 3 from the Parsha, 4 from
Rosh
Chodesh.
Yeah.
To include that part which you count as Parshat Shkalim.
That's correct. According to Rav, that's correct.
Which we don't do.
Correct. Yes, Ben.
I actually lost you at where we said 3 תרומות הן של מזבח למזבח, אדנים לאדנים. How far did you go after that?
Okay, so what we went right after that was the next part of the Gemara. So after we explained that there's no challenge to Shmuel, because the fact is in Parshas Kisisa it mentions 3 offerings, and one of them were the offerings that went to the Karbonos. So therefore it's not a challenge to him. Then we came and we challenged Shmuel. Rav. What was the challenge to Rav? Challenge to Rav was that when we talk about changing the regular reading to the reading of, let's say, Parshas Shkalim, I can understand why when Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, right, well, when Rosh Chodesh Adar falls out on Shabbos, I can understand why you could still say that there's a different reading on this Shabbos Rosh Chodesh than all other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. Why? Because on all other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, you would read from where? You would read from Parshas Pinchas, and this Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, instead of reading Parshas Pinchas, you would read Parshas Kisisa, and so there would be clearly a difference. However, you're telling me that Parshas Shkolim means to read from Parshas Pinchas. How is that different from every other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh where you would read from Parshas Pinchas?
I don't see Parsha Pinchas mentioned here where I'm looking. I don't know.
I know, because he calls it Savas B'nai Yisrael. Savas B'nai Yisrael
Okay.
from Parshas
Savas B'nai Yisrael v'amart alehem et korbani lachmi.
That's right. That's from Parshas Pinchas, from the fifth call up from Chamishi in Parshas Pinchas. That's where this portion appears.
Okay.
Now, usually every Rosh Chodesh we read this portion, right? Now, Rav is of the opinion that this portion is also read as Parshas Shkolim. If that's the case, when we say that we're going to exchange the regular reading for Parshas Shkolim, if you go according to Rav, there's no change actually happening, it seems. Why? Because just like every Rosh Chodesh, you'd read that portion, Shabbos Shkolim, you'd also read that portion, and there would be no apparent difference between the two. So the Gemara answers that actually there would be a difference between a regular Shabbos Rosh Chodesh and the Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar. What is that? Well, usually what we would do is we would read we would call up 6 people to read from the regular portion of the Torah, and then the 7th person would be called up to read what? To read the portion of Rosh Chodesh. Whereas now, because of Parshas Shkolim, right, instead of reading the regular Parsha, right, you would read, according to Rav, you would read from the beginning of the Rosh Chodesh reading, which is Tzavas B'nai Yisrael es Karbani Lachmi, and then you would continue on and you would read the portion of Rosh Chodesh, and that's how you would split up all the aliyot, right? That's how you would split up all the aliyot.
But after that, it says in Shmuel Amar Kitisa. Bishlama.
No. So the Gemara. Okay, let's go back for a second. The Gemara is saying that when we discuss the difference between Shabbos, Rosh Chodesh Adar, and every other Shabbos, if you go according to Shmuel, who says Parshas Shkolim means Parshas Kisisa, then there's a clear difference between this Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar, and all the other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh. Why? Because on every other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, we don't read from Kisisa. So that would be the difference, right? But according to Rav, who says that Parshas Shkolim is not from Kisisa, but rather from Parshas Pinchas, then what would be the difference from this Shabbos Rosh Chodesh to every other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh? So he says, the Gemara answers that the difference would be the way we split it up. Usually, on every other Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, we would read the regular Parshat HaShavua. We would read at the beginning, and then the last Aliyah, instead of him reading the Parshat HaShavua, he would read the Parsha of Rosh Chodesh. Whereas now, what we do is, according to Rav, when Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, when Rosh Chodesh falls out on Shabbos in Adar, what we do is we read the Parsha Shkolim first. That's the first part of in Parshas Pinchas, which talks about Tzavas B'nai Yisrael as Karbani Lachmi, and then the last one we would call up and give him the reading for Rosh Chodesh. So now the Gemara challenges that as well, and it says that this explanation of Rav would work well according to the person who says that we suspend the regular reading of the Torah for all these Torah readings, right? However, what about the person who says we don't suspend the regular reading? We have the normal reading as usual, right? And it's only the Haftorah that we change. We only change the last Aliyah. In that case, the last Aliyah, right? The last Aliyah would be the same for Rosh Chodesh as it would be for Parshas Shkolim, according to Rav. So we're still left with a problem. To that, the Gemara answers that there's still a difference. And what's the difference? The difference is we're going to split up the different call-ups to the Torah as follows. We're going to have only the first 3 people read the Parshat HaShavua because it is Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar and we're going to read Shabbos Shekalim. So therefore, instead of, one second, let me explain what normally happens and what happens Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar. What normally would happen is 6 people would be called out for the Parshat HaShavua, and then 1 person would be called out for Rosh Chodesh. But when it falls out on Parshat Shekalim and it's Rosh Chodesh, then we split it up completely different. We say the Parshat HaShavua, let's say for argument's sake, is Shabbos Vayakel, right? Let's say Shabbos Vayakel is the Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar. So we read the whole Parshat Vayakel between 3 people. So somehow you split that whole Parsha into 3. Usually it's split into 7. Now we split it into 3. First guy, Cohen, gets 1/3 of the Parsha. Levi gets the second third of the Parsha. And Yisrael gets the third of the Parsha. Now you're left with 4 aliyot. This is when we would read the Parsha for Shekalim, which is the beginning section of the Rosh Chodesh reading. That would be for Parsha Shekalim. The next guy and the guy after him would split the 4 guys left over would divide up the Rosh Chodesh reading. Okay, and that's how you would have the difference between a regular Rosh Chodesh and Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos Rosh Chodesh Adar. Okay, so far so good?
Okay, so far good.
Okay. So says the Gemara, Meisvei, I'm going to challenge this position of Rav from a Brisa. It says, Rosh Chodesh Adar shecholis b'Shabbos, when Rosh Chodesh Adar would fall out of Shabbos, Karen b'Parsha Shekalim, you read the Parsha of Shekalim, umaftirin b'Yehoyada HaKohen, and you read with the reading of the Haftarah that comes from where it talks about Yehoyada HaKohen, who came and he helped to rededicate the Beis Hamikdash. So now, it makes sense that the Haftarah for Parsha Shekalim should be from the portion that talks about Yehoyada HaKohen. Why? Behind it, maftirim Yehoyada HaKohen, the Damilei, because it's similar, because the Chesiv says Kesef Nafshis Erkoin, the money of his valuation of persons, which is a reference to the Machzah Shekel. As Karbani Lachmi, but according to the one who says that we don't read about the actual Shekalim, but you read about the Karbanis Midami, is it really compared? Answers the Gemara. We'll stop over here. Answers the Gemara, Dami, it is similar to the Rav Tavi, as Rav Tavi explained, as we mentioned before, that because the whole purpose of giving the Shekalim is for the purpose of bringing up the Karbanos, so therefore, when we read the portion about Yehoyada HaKohen, which talks about the Shekalim, it is also a remembrance about the ultimate purpose, which was to bring Shekalim for their Karbanos. And we will stop over here. Maybe tomorrow I will do a quick review on this, so hopefully it will be clear to everybody. I'm sorry if I got stuck a little bit today. Anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
No problem. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a good day.